If you recall, we've hired somebody. We changed his benefits. We entered some sick time. We also entered some time on another time card. Now we're at the point where we're ready to pay somebody, and following that, we follow the funding through the general ledger, through the commitment accounting to the general ledger. So Diane, want to take away?
Hello, y'all. The best part, now we get to pay our employee. And I just want to reiterate that this is not an integrated system. It is one system. So we don't have, for those who are on ADP, we don't have, e-time is not a silo. You have time and labor. BOSS, which is our benefits, is a silo. It's all together in one system. So they're not integration points. There aren't waiting times for things to feed over. We don't have to load ER cost because it's all there. So it's one system. Yay! All of it works together for the most important thing, which is paying the employee, of which we are one. So we want to make sure we get paid correctly and hopefully streamline the payroll process, have it run a lot more smoothly since we're not worrying about integration points and bringing it all together. So what we're going to do, I'm not going to go into the module for payroll. Things are not really changing as far as payroll. Payroll is payroll. You create your pay sheets, you're loading your time, you're calcing, and you're confirming. Woohoo! Payroll in 5 seconds. I don't know why it takes us 2 days now, but we just processed a payroll. And of course there's more to it. There's audit reports and all the functionality that we now have is going to continue to be there, as well as some more enhancements like a retro pay process where based on job data changes, things will automatically retro into the payroll system with a calc, and it can be reviewed by the practitioners back at the institution so they could look it over, make sure everything is the way. We can take care of, override it on the pay line. Well, what we're trying to do is to get away from 2, 3, and 4 spreadsheets with deduction corrections and ER corrections and additional pay. We're hoping that having this one system, we're going to greatly cut down on the manual intervention on the pay line. So if we have retro pay, we also have retro benefit deduction. I don't know if benefits, I'm in another module section, but it looks at changes in status and coverage, and it looks at dates. So when you go ahead and do your retro benefit deduction, it's going to catch people up, and it's going to take care of those things so we don't have to modify that on the pay line any longer. And that'll all be done reviewable prior to final calc and confirm. So now that we've paid Sylvester, Dr. Salone, we're going to go into the functionality that we want to show is called Paycheck Modeler. Right now, if your employee wants to know, what's my paycheck going to look like when I get my really big raise that the USG gave out this year? Or what is it going to look like if I put, yes, it was funny. What's it going to look like if I put another $100 in my 403B? So they have right now they usually go to the payroll practitioner who has to sit there and fool around with it. But part of the employee self-service is Paycheck Modeler. They can play with their earnings. You know, it might not come to reality, but they can know what it looks like if they're getting a $500, an hour raise. They can change deductions that they can change. They can't change their ORP contributions or things like that. 403B, things like that they can change. They can also change their taxes. Now, it's not a live change into the system. It's a model change. It's a temporary snapshot, what it would look like if I changed. So if we go ahead into the system, we're going into Mirzavino because the reason we can't do it for Sly is he was paid on September 30th, so we can't model a paycheck that's future dated. So we're getting into Mirzavino, sorry. Just another employee, and this is the page as it'll look. And down at the bottom, you have to say, yes, I understand that this is just estimates. It's, might not be an exact representation, but it's as close as we can get it. And let's get started. It's spinning, it's thinking. It's a little slower when you're in an environment like this. So the first thing we're going to look at is changing earnings. And as you can see, there's an amount of 34, I can't really read it, 34, 53, 58, and there's a little pencil for edit. So we're gonna click on that, and we're gonna change, she's getting a raise till $4,000, say. So you just go ahead, put the $4,000 in there, hit OK. And then you go to the next. And here's where you can make some changes to different benefit plans. If you're changing, you have a family, or you're dropping coverage for somebody. Well, we're going to go ahead and change to 403B, because this is something that we would like to show. Maybe put it up to $150 now that she has a raise. She can afford to put a little bit more in her 403B. Okay. I think I have to scroll down. Okay, and next. And then it brings you to the tax panel, where you can change your federal and your Georgia for this employee. She's a Georgia resident. And you can change, maybe she got married and wants to claim one allowance. And okay. And then you go next. Or you can change Georgia if you want to. Now you know you can't change Georgia, online. You still have to do the G4. That's not functionality of the system. That's the state of Georgia. But you can model it in Paycheck Modeler. And next. And this is the same where you show where they prompt and they guide you through. And then you want to calculate your modeled check. And it's go ahead and it's doing a little mini payroll calc. And there it's been calculated. Go to next. And there's her new gross earnings. There's the new taxes. There's the new deduction amounts. And it shows on the left totals, on the right what the tax is, the before tax. Gives you a ratio, how much is going into taxes, how much is she getting in her net pay. And this is, like I said, this is a snapshot in time. This isn't doing anything. Didn't update her tax panel, didn't change her 403B, just a picture of what her check is going to look like. So I think that's a big win for the payroll practitioner. Okay. So the next thing, as we move on, we're going to talk about, next slide. We're going to talk about some decision points that have been made. We had a lot of fit gap and a lot of things came out to that where we're trying to centralize and standardize certain functions. One of them I had already talked about, retro pay. It's going to be configured in the system, reviewable by the institution prior to final calc and confirm. Overpayments, we're looking at the possibility of centralizing some overpayments to have things more standard. We have developed something for the BPM because there's really nothing in there now. Looking at possible policies on repayment, spreadsheets on how to configure the repayments, how much the employee should repay, letters that will go to the employee, so it's standard across all. We're also a little plug for payroll standardization, something that we've been talking about for a long time and trying to get away from the specialized payroll processes, and that's going to be part of the BPM panel discussion at 3:20 today in Oglethorpe C. There's going to be a panel discussion, and it's going to cover more than just payroll, but that's one of the topics they're going to talk about there. The two big ones that I want to talk about that I want you to come away with is pay week is changing. We have different institutions, and we're moving to one system, so we have to all have the same pay week, begin and end. And it has been decided and approved that we're moving from what we have currently to Sunday to Saturday. And that is going to be our new pay week, beginning on Sunday and ending on Saturday. For those who are on the ADP platform, and I know Sandy and I have talked about this, that means we're going to have since we end on Friday now, we're going to have that one Saturday in there that we're going to have to manually work on how we're going to handle. It's going to be paid in the old system, it's going to be paid in the new system, and we'll do that on a case-by-case basis with the institutions. So the work week, any questions on the work week? Because that's kind of new with everybody being on the same work week. And then the next thing we're going to talk about is summer payroll. We just got through another summer payroll process, fun as that is. Summer payroll, it has been decided that for those who were on PeopleSoft prior, we're kind of going back to the old way of doing it. We're going to use the S pay group, and there will be an additional job for our faculty who are teaching in the summer and putting them in the S pay group for processing their pay. So I don't know if that's, I know that a lot of folks are interested in hearing more about that. We're fleshing out the details. We don't have, all the specifics yet. That's in the works. We're worried right now about implementation pilot, and, if they go live in December, we have a couple months to work out the summer pay. But those are the two big things that I wanted folks to take away. The work week is changing, and summer payroll will be also a process that's changing. Any questions on payroll? Just general ones? Yeah, we're going to look at the paycheck. So now we're going to look at where all the HR, Sylvester Stallone, Dr. Stallone has been hired. He's selected his benefits. We've processed payroll. And here comes his paycheck. And this is what it's going to look like to the employee when they go through employee self-service. This is the new pay statement. There's a lot more detail on these statements than what's in the current statement online. So we'll go ahead and pull that up. The pay statement, review, it's in self-service. So we're kind of hopping back and forth. We had to get out for Mira Sovino to do the paycheck modeler. So he's going to get back now to see the check for Assistant Professor Sylvester Stallone. And you can see where it's got the pay begin and end date, the pay date. And this is what the paycheck stub looks like. This is in employee self-service. This is what the employee can access and see. It has the pay group. It has the pay begin and end date, EMPL ID, the job title, the pay rate for the employee. There will be, you can see, remember we had given him some sick leave. So there's his sick time on there, the regular time. Of course, sick doesn't add to gross because he's a monthly employee, but it's still out on there, that different withholdings that he has. And then if you'll notice down at the bottom, it's broken out between before tax deductions, after tax deduction, and employer paid benefits. So they can see what their pre-tax, what their after-tax, and how much the employer has put in. Also to note, down at the bottom, even though he doesn't have any sick time, he's a new hire, but down the bottom would be your start balance for your sick leave, and anything earned. Bot won't show up because we don't have the ability to buy sick time. So earned and taken, we won't have sold. We can configure that. And it should show them a actual sick and vacation balance on their pay stub. So that's another big win too, so employees can see that. But and it's configurable, so we can take care and make that look how we want it to look. So I think that's a big win for us now, that the employees can see that sick and vacation time balance, because it'll hopefully cut down on some of the questions and help the practitioner at the institutional level not have to constantly be answering questions for employees on what will look if I change this, or how much leave time, and those types of things. Any questions on what the paycheck or the pay stub looks like? It's a lot of information on there, a lot more than we have now, but I think it's really good and it's laid out well. So, alrighty, and that's payroll.
Okay, so now the real fun part begins. So for those of you who have worked, can I just get kind of an idea of who we have in the room? Who works with the accounting, GL, any kind of reconciliation problem, whether you're in payroll or whether you're on the financial side? Okay. All right, so how many of you are non-financial people? You just want to be in here because you think being an accountant is awesome and you want to be an accountant when you grow up. Okay. Those of you, well, there was a handout. If you don't have a handout, because there's a workflow, process flow, if y'all will turn to this. Dan's brought it up. It might be a little bit small in the handout, but I kind of wanted to go through this first before we go looking into the configuration for commitment accounting. It really starts with departments, right? Department is a cost center. Now, some of those HR folks might argue with me just a little bit, but stay with me. For finance people, and a department is a cost center. So we have to set up that department first. So there's some configuration that has to happen first. And then there are handoffs between different areas of the system. So for commitment accounting, we set up a department. HR would set up a position. Somebody in budget or finance would tie funding to that position. Human resources hires somebody into that position. Benefits, time and labor, payroll. At some point in payroll, we have a pre-distribution audit report where we can check to see if there are any invalid funding for any of those checks. Gives us an opportunity to fix stuff, okay? We have this currently in ADP. Again, we have going forward into the new HCM is after payroll is confirmed, we're gonna have another chance to fix those errors before they get sent to financials. So that's who win. After payroll confirmed, now we have another pre-distribution audit. It goes into distribute actuals, we review those actuals. There is we call it a Payglow 02, but it's really the 002 process. It's a GL interface. So a couple of changes in terminology as we go, and Craig has alluded to this, and some of the other presenters have alluded to this. There's going to be a change in verbiage. Our language is going to change a little bit. So if you will, actuals distribution currently is being processed by ADP. It's that 001, for those of you who are familiar with these processes, I see head nods. That is the 001. Currently, ADP runs that for us. Going forward, that is a function that is going to be returned to the institutions. The 002 is now the GL interface. For those of you who were in PeopleSoft before, that probably sounds familiar. It was the old GL interface process, okay? So I'm going to try to start moving our language that way, but I want us to also help us move that, y'all make the connection between ADP nomenclature and the new nomenclature. So after that 002 process is run, HR accounting lines are created. At the same time, Purser Board will be populated, just like it is now. One of the cool things, if you work with this process now, you have to wait. And wait. Top of the hour, our file becomes available, we hope. It gets swept into our FTP. Now we have to pull this file down, we have to give it to somebody, and now this person has to upload it. The new world, when we run the 002 process, the GL interface process, HR accounting line and Purser Board are populated. There is no more file moving. That data will be messaged from HCM over to financials. No more file moving. That's a woohoo, because that becomes an audit issue. You've got a text file floating around that has confidential information. So just kind of an overview of this. Then, of course, we go through the journal generation process in the financial system. So, but before we get to this, some configuration and setup has to be done. The first thing is departments. Departments will be created in financials just like they are now. Remember, cost center. Those departments will be messaged over. And again, as part of these presentations, we've been saying there is no overnight feed. There is no, there's going to be, it's not there, blink your eye. There's maybe a few minutes where that messaging is going from financials over into the HCM system. And that department is immediately available to be used to be set up on a position. So once we've got our department, then the next piece is setting up that position. Now, one of the things that has been a big change for us is position no longer contains funding. Right now, if you're familiar with the position management, we have to tie funding to that position. And there's been some struggle between who is in charge of position management. Is it HR, because it has a lot of HR functions, or does it belong to budget, because it's got money involved with that? So now we're able to separate those pieces apart, where HR can go out and they can create those position numbers, and now budget can handle the funding part, okay? And we can separate those and segregate it by security, okay? So the funding is also set up on the departmental budget table. We're going to take a look at that in just a minute. But those are some of the main differences now between what we've been doing in ADP and what's going forward. So the first thing we want to look at is combo codes. When I say combo code, here's another language translation. Our old payroll distribution codes that we currently use, set up in financials, they're called PDCs. Same thing as a combination code. All that is we take chart field elements and we string them together and we tie them under a single code. That process won't change. Those combo codes, I'm trying to move our language, payroll distribution codes, i.e. combo codes, will be set up in financials, will be messaged over. No more overnight feed like right now. You know, if you set one up, you got to wait till the next day. Most of the time that's not a big deal unless it's budget prep. And you need a new chart field string because you've just made a funding change. We're moving from Fund 10 to Fund 10.5, and we've got to have that combo code. So no more of that. So then it's bringing up this combo code table. Now this is in the HCM. Notice we cannot edit. We can look at it, but we cannot edit because the source data is coming from financials. So, and I want to point, don't let the 999s fool you. Those of you who work with the GL process now, you know, you see a 999 and it's like deer in the headlights, like, oh my gosh. So don't let that fool you. We're going to look at account code mapping in just a few minutes. Yes?
Going back to the combo code, that is in the HCM module, so the accountants usually set those things up for other modules. So would you have to have security in the HCM module, or would that be?
We're going to continue to set it up in financials, so that security will be handled in PSFin, and then it's going to feed, it's going to message. See, I've got to change my verbiage too. It's going to message over and populate this table.
I just noticed the breadcrumbs in those modules in the HCM.
This is in the HCM module. Yes, because this is what we've sent over from financials, but we cannot edit it from here. But this is where we can go in if we have a question and we don't have access to financials. If something bombs, if we get an error on our pre-distribution audit, we can go here and go, what's wrong? Maybe whoever set that up forgot a class field. We're going to have an error there, so we can look at it from here. If you'll notice the GL combo code, we have the ability to set those up. We're talking about a standard naming convention, but I don't think we've come up with that finalized yet. Again, it identifies a chart field. This is going to feed over when we do the accounting distribution and the GL interface process. Same thing as our payroll distribution code, and it's going to be messaged over pretty instantaneously. The next thing we want to look at is our departmental budget table. How many of y'all worked in the old HRMS, PeopleSoft? Okay, so when you all see this, this is going to look very familiar. Our old departmental budget tables. This is what creates, controls funding. This is where we tie that position to funding. Okay, so again, this is where we can. Dan's bring it up. We're going to bring up Rocky's position number. I know we've been talking about Slice long. He's like Rocky, right? Come on, he's Rocky. How are you laughing? Go over to the departmental budget table. Budget earnings, you got it. Okay, so if you look at Rocky's position that's been set up in departmental budget table, this is how we tie the funding. Notice at the level that's in the center, there's an effective date. When we do budget prep, it's going to have a 7/1 date. We have the ability to go in here, say middle of the year, this funding changes. We can go in and insert a row and change that funding. Also notice we have the ability to split fund, which we do now, but guess what? We have the ability to separate deduction and taxes from following. So those of you who have grants, where the grant, I know, woohoo on that, right? So I don't have to do those GL adjusts on every single payroll for these people. Earnings go here, but that grant does not cover the benefits or taxes, the fringe. So every payroll, you have to go out there and do something to move it. In this case, if you look at the budget deductions, these are the employer costs for your health, life, and taxes are the same. So right now, we've got this slide split, and it's the same across his earnings, his benefits, and his taxes. But if this were a grant, we could go in and say we want his employer deductions to go to the department, but I want his earnings to go to the grant. So we've gained this functionality back. We didn't have this in ADP, okay? So deductions and taxes, we can split them, we can set fringes to follow or not follow. Any questions about the departmental budget table? This is cool stuff. I know y'all don't get too excited, because the financial people were like, don't get too excited. But inside, I know you're jumping up and down. Because this is, it's like, don't let them know we're excited. I forgot, can you bring that back up? Another thing that we've gotten the ability to do is those of you who have grants whose end dates do not correspond with our FY, which is what, like 95% of our grants don't follow our fiscal year. We have the ability to go into there and enter a funding end date on departmental budget table for that grant. So if we scroll over to, no, we don't have one, but see that column where it says funding end date right below the combination code description? And whenever we go in to do something else, I'll show you how we can enter one. But because the payroll has been processed against this, we can't edit it. So that's another really good feature, is if we have data sitting out here in departmental budget table, once we've processed a payroll against this, it cannot be edited. That's a good thing for audit. Okay, so we can't go flipping around with stuff after payroll's been processed against it. We would have to enter another row or a budget retro process. Okay, so but this is where we would enter that funding end date if we had a grant. Quick thing about account code mapping. Y'all remember when we looked at the combo code setup, it had all those 999s across the account? Currently in ADP, if you've ever gone out there and just got kicks and giggles and wanted to look in foundation tables, or the 6-digit expense account were tied to the earnings codes directly. If you went out there and looked them up. If you haven't, it's okay, you're not missing a whole lot. But just so you understand the difference between that one-to-one tie and the way we have to set it up for the commitment accounting module in HCM. We don't have those individual accounts on earnings codes. All of that processing is handled through what we call mapping tables. So I just wanted to show you, there's 4 mapping tables. There's one for earnings, there's one for the deductions, there's one for taxes, and there's also one for our liability accounts. So if we look just at the one for earnings for Rocky, if you see this 40F, that's the pay group that he's in, and he's paid reg pay. If you look up there at the set ID, notice it's share. We're all going to play in the same sandbox. The account number is the faculty expense account. So this is how we map earnings to pay groups to expense accounts. Okay? And I'm not going to go through and show all of them, but I kind of wanted to give you an idea of what those account mappings are. It's just a little bit differently, and those are going to be maintained by our shared services center. And this will make more sense when we get in and we look at actuals distribution. You're going to start seeing how all of these configuration pieces come together to give us our HR accounting lines for our journal entries. So let's look at slides paycheck. Well, we've already looked at it once, but I want you to make some mental notes about numbers. Because when we go look at his expenses, remember he was split funded 50-50? When we look at his actuals distribution, just kind of make some mental notes about numbers. Okay? So if you'll look at his salary was what, 78, 83, 33. Okay, so just mentally 78. So let's look at some of his taxes. So if you'll notice the ER, we've got 107 and we got 460 for OSDI. Okay, now let's look at some deductions. Those are remember, these are the employer costs, okay? Paycheck deductions, you can see we have the non-taxable benefit for health insurance is $817, okay? So now let's go look at the actuals distribution. This is the process that goes in and looks at what their position is set up in departmental budget table. It takes their paycheck, and then it looks at this account mapping that we have up for actuals. Actuals meaning expenses, not liabilities at this point. So if you go back to, if you've still got your, I just kind of want to let you know where we are. Now this has already been processed, so we can't make any changes. But at this point, we would be at the distribute actuals right here. Okay, so we would run this distribute actuals. It's going to populate this table. Now, all of these fields are locked because we've run the 002, but have we not completed this process, this would be editable. So as part of our pre-distribution audit, if we got an error, we could correct it right here before going any further. So that whenever we, so that whenever it gets to GL, we don't have the 999s. If we have other things that maybe they were charged to the wrong account, and we found out, when I say account, combo code, they should have been charged to English, but somebody keyed it wrong and they got charged to the Department of Science. We could fix it here, okay? And this table is also audited, and this is core. You as an institution would not just let anybody have core access to this table. Whoever is here needs to know what they're doing because they have the keys to the kingdom at this point. So you would have very limited access, and those people would need to know what they were doing here, okay? So just be thinking about that when you're coming to our security. So our distributed actuals, if you see the combination code, think, oh, well, that's just one of them. His total amount was $78.83.33, the earnings code regular. But look at the distribution line where it says FY1613. The amount that's being distributed is half to this combo code. So if you notice, there's the account. Even though that chart, that combo code that's sitting in the front, when we looked at that combo code, it had 999s, right? That account mapping is where this comes into play, to put that dollar amount into that account. And so you can see, can you scroll to the right just a little bit? There's our fund programming class. And this half is being, if you look over at the first of two, can you go to the second one of that? Yeah. Here's the other half. Remember, he was split funded. The same thing is true if you look at our the deduction tab. Now here, this is an employee deduction. There's nothing there. That process of what ties those employee deductions to the liability accounts is handled through the 002 process and looks at that liability account mapping, okay? But you can see any of his employer costs. There's his health insurance. How much was that health insurance? Do y'all remember? $817, $408.50. So you see it followed the split, okay? And the same thing is true with taxes. We won't go and look at that. Okay, so at this point, we would be reviewing our actuals, making any corrections that we needed to. Then we would run what's called the 002 or the GL interface process. When we do that, that's when HR accounting line and that's when purse or bore would be populated. So we're going to get Dan to run us a query where the actuals distribution has a nice pretty page we can go look at. HR accounting line does not. So we're going to query out of it so we can see the lines. So this is what got sent to HR accounting line that we can then pick up over in financials and journal gen against. Okay? So if you know account codes, all that good stuff, right? Now I will say this, if those of you who are the accountants and know your account codes, you're going to go, oh wait, that's a 226 account. That's a liability account. Why does it have a full chart fill string? Because that's one of the first things. As delivered, that was one of our guiding principles going into this project, was to use the system as vanilla as possible. Because anytime you start customizing and you start modding, when you upgrade, you've got to revisit and upgrade those mods. So we're trying to go as vanilla as possible. The delivered 002 process offsets with the full chart fill string. We've got a mod in place right now that's going to move this to Fund 6200. Okay, but we wanted you to see we have a working GL interface. For those of you who went through ADP, there were still some schools in October, after go live in August, we were still working with them to get those GL files interfaced. So that meant they couldn't close out August, they couldn't close out September. and now we're at the end of October, and we're still trying to get payroll files interfaced. So from the get-go, this has been a foundational piece to make sure when we go live, we have a working, accurate GL interface process so we can account for those paychecks, okay? Because again, when we went to ADP, we got out a paycheck, it was like, I'm done. Y'all ever seen those, I call them steer wrestlers? Isn't that what they're called, the steer wrestlers? Like they send out the little cow, and then the guy on the horse comes, and he jumps on him and grabs him, flips him over, and ties the thing, and he does like this. That's kind of the way I felt like when we went through ADP. I was like, okay, got a check, we're done. And we kind of forgot about, woo! So we kind of forgot about the whole, we need to account for this, and we need to be able to audit it. So we just wanted to show y'all, this is working. This is live. The payroll that our HR people entered, Travis and his group, they enrolled them in benefits. Barney and the time and labor and Dan got their hours. Payroll, calc the check, confirm payroll. We have an HR accounting line. So this is a big, big win for those of us who are accounting people.
Accounting question, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
You said rerun journal generators?
To run Journal Gen over in financials.
Well, it just brought up the question, if we ever have to do the rerun and effective, we have to do the purge process.
A purge,
You know, that's,
right, so if we have something that really dies over there, we would probably have to do a DBI and reset those flags in HR accounting line so you could read Journal Gen. Because this is messaging over. We're not uploading those files anymore. Like now, if it dies, we kill it. When we run that purge, we reload that file. There is no file anymore. Because the HCM and HRMS, we're going to message purse or bore and HR accounting line over to the financial side. So we're going to have tests in place to make sure that these tables are staying in sync between one another. So once that flag is checked over in financials that we've journal gen against that HR accounting line, we will double check on that. That's a very good question. But please make that on your card.
If we were to purge and do something on financials, that means that HR and financials can be out of sync, which we don't want. And so I think it's what happens when something happens that you didn't want to happen. Ultimately, we're going to need to go back and, in theory, make the correction in HR and send it back over again. We'll have to work through the details, exactly how that works.
so everything still flows one way.
Yes. Which leads us into our next part. Right now, if those of you who also run the GL interface, those processes, you know we have a GL adjust, right? We can go in there basically line by line, which is very tedious if you've got to move an entire check or a range of checks. In the departmental budget table, we have a way of doing what's called a budget retro. There are two retro processes that we now have. One is called a budget retro and one is a direct retro. I'm not going to discuss the direct retro because it's very similar to what we're using with the GL adjust process currently. You need one line transaction moved. But if you've got a lot of checks for several people, the whole department, we would go into the departmental budget table. Now, a payroll has already been processed against this line. So September, we split funded him. Well, then we find out the first part of October, oh no, he should not have been split funded. Starting August or September, he should have been single funded. So what we would do is we would insert a row. Remember, this is effective date. You saw that first row was the entrance. We would change that effective date to just say 8/1. And let's assume that he had been paid for August and September. Okay, and we need to reallocate both of those payments. So we would insert an effective date and we would change, we're just going to change his earnings. Just delete that bottom row and change that first row's distribution to 100%. Now we're not going to save it because when we save this, it creates a trigger that opens up the budget retro process where we can go and review what's being moved from one cost center to the other. Gives us an opportunity to make sure it looks like what we want it to look like. Then as we proceed through, it's very much like the accounting distribution, the actuals distribution. and the 002 GL interface process, where it's gonna write those adjustments to HR accounting line, and it's gonna write it to purse or bore. Those get copied over. So now we have those retro transactions copied in both of those tables. So if we ever query purse or bore HR accounting line for this person to find out where they were charged for the FY, we have that at a detail level, because it's gonna get written into purse or bore. So at this point, we would, also I wanted to show you, see how that funding end date box opened up? Because we've not processed any payrolls against this line in the departmental budget table. We would be able to end, just say a 7/31. So you can freeform this. This isn't really a good example, but yeah, he could put in 2006. Say this was a grant, and we wanted to enter that future dated end row, we could. Okay? So he's gone back out of that. We're not going to save that. But that's how we would do it. And we could do the same for earnings, deductions, and taxes individually. So if all we needed to move were the earnings, we could do that. Deductions and taxes are fine. They just stay where they are. If deductions were wrong and we could move that and leave the earnings and taxes where they needed to be. But when that happens, it moves any transaction for that employee. Okay, so that's not a line item like we do right now on the GL adjust process. Any questions about that? Okay. So if you go back to your financial process flow, that HR accounting, now we've run that 002, it's populated, we're right here. Right here. We've populated it, it gets messaged over. The next step is we journal generate. Okay? Any questions about it? Yes. I'm looking at Craig to go, do we touch that here or?
Repeat the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was what about encumbrances? Go ahead. Okay.
Lightly.
Lightly. Okay, and I want to make sure that we get out, because tummies are probably starting to growl. We looked at the delivered. Again, going back to our starting philosophy, we're going to try to use as much vanilla delivered. We looked at the delivered encumbrance process. Didn't do what we as a system needed it to do. So we're building a custom encumbrance process. We are making some gains because if you run it now and you understand how it works, it looks at the last paycheck that was processed for that employee. So like you really can't really run it in July if you've got faculty payrolls in July, because it's going to look at that last faculty payroll. They don't have any benefits. So it's not going to project out correctly. So we have a lot of constraints with our current encumbrance process. So the new one is not going to look at last check. It's going to look at a series of flags on the employees that are eligible. Pay group is one of those. Like right now, that's currently, a lot of people don't encumber their C pay groups or their L's, so it's going to be pay group specific. Each institution is going to choose which pay groups they want to encumber. So that functionality is still there. But it's not going to look at last paycheck. It's going to look at, are they active now and at their current comp rate on job data. So there's no dependency if they've already been paid. Because now if you run it and that person's not been paid, they don't get picked up until the next time you run it. There's also something called a true-up process. So there's not going to be any more zeroing of encumbrances. It's going to true up and automatically zero those back and forth. So we'll have more information on that as we get closer. But just so y'all know that encumbrances are definitely part of scope. We're just having to build them because we could not use what was delivered. And it's going to be a lot better than what we had previously. Does that help? Well, I was excited when we first started seeing some of the stuff coming out of it. So, we good? Right. Yes.
In the old system, if I remember correctly, if someone did inserted a new effective date of row, you can typically go and see who it was and when they did it. Is that still going to be?
And what her question is basically going back to panel audits. Yes. Auditing will be turned on, especially on the departmental budget table. Because whoever has root access, I call it root access, because that's really what you have. You have access to the departmental budget tables. If someone goes in there and makes a change, we need to know who did it and when they did it. Yes.
But, you know, plus, that in federal, sometimes with the pay distributions and things, I guess because they were all the same thing for the budget load team, sometimes you can change something on the position, but it wouldn't necessarily load the job data, so we have to do the hokey pokey.
Yes.
Is that
Okay.
been resolved?
So what the question was, does anybody, y'all know what the hokey pokey is? Okay. Does anybody not know what the hokey pokey is? Okay. No more hokey pokey. For funding. Now if somebody goes on, there may be some hokey pokey in for HR data that I'd have to defer that to Lori.
And you don't have the funding in two places.
But we don't have the funding in two places. The funding is tied to that position on the departmental budget table. If you make the change there, when that actuals distribution runs, it doesn't look there, it looks at what's in departmental budget table. So good stuff. It's okay, y'all can get excited as accountants. I'm gonna turn it over to Barney, he's gonna close us up. Any questions y'all have you may have asked, please write them down on the card so we can capture them, because there's gonna be other people that have, Oh, put it up here, excuse me. Craig's giving us other directions.
Thanks, Colette. All right, let's give everybody a round of applause. That was a fabulous end-to-end session. I hope everybody got the idea that we were trying to convey, that, you know, from start to finish, this system is one system under the HCM module. And then there's an integration point between HCM and financials where things are messaged back and forth so that the data is consistent across both systems. And we have the capability to manage and influence that data at the institution level, at shared services, and at the individual practitioner levels. So if you have any additional questions, please use those note cards and bring those up and leave them on the desk in front of us. And also, our oneusg website is up and running. And if you have questions that you think of later and you'd like to email them to us, you can email them to oneusg@usg.edu. So thank you guys for attending, and we hope you have a great afternoon and a wonderful weekend coming up.